So thank you all of you for joining today's webinar. My name is Dr. Sophia Wenzler. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and so also the clinical lead here at TrickStop. TrickStop is an online therapy program that is therapist assisted, and this program is basically bringing today's webinar to you. And we're going to talk about teenagers. Teenagers, how to understand them and how to support them when they're pulling their hair. And I want to encourage you to stick around until the end because there's going to be a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. So my presentation is going to be about 40 to 45 minutes long, and then we're going to jump into the Q&A section. And we also have a promo code for you in case at the end of the seminar you want to subscribe to TrickStop. Yeah, if you have questions, then you can write them down in the Q&A section during my presentation or at the end. Please don't raise your hands because I'm not going to respond to raised hands. I'm only going to respond to the questions in the Q&A section. All right, let's get into it. So I want to invest quite a lot of our time into understanding teenagers better because there's a lot of super interesting research that came up in the last, let's say, 1 or 2 decades that we didn't know before, specifically about what's happening in the teenager's brain and how that influences their behavior and how that is connected to the developmental tasks that they have to manage or cope with this stage of life and the challenges that the stage brings with it. So that's super interesting. And once we have a decent understanding of that, it's going to be much, much easier to communicate with your teenager, understand them, decode their behaviors, and also support them in case they're hair pulling. So obviously we're going to talk about that also. Then we're going to conclude and go into the Q&A section. All right, understanding teenagers. Generally, when we talk about teenagers or think about teenagers from an adult perspective, a lot of the time, a lot of associations are actually negative. Teenagers don't want to hear what I say. Their body develops. They're not children anymore. They have acne and pimples, and they have to learn body hygiene. They sleep all the time for weird reasons. They exaggerate. They have really intense emotions. They don't really know what's good for them. They care mostly about their friends. They're awkward, right? Those are the negative associations that might come up. But I want to invite you, before we dive into this topic, to remember yourself as a teenager for a moment. Go back to those years, even close your eyes if you want to. Go back to those years when you were 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. Remember maybe, the pictures you have in your picture albums of that time. Remember what school was like for you, school dances, your friends, things you like to do. Maybe you had a crush on someone or even a relationship. And what was your home like? What was life like in your family? And on top of the teenager that you might have at home, whose parent you are, also remember that, your own inner teenager, because it's important to not lose this connection and remember what it was like if we want to understand, teenagers, even when we're already adults. I had the pleasure of spending some quality time with teenagers lately. I do work as a therapist. I do work a lot with teenagers. It's one of the things that I really love to do. But I did spend quite a lot of time with my 2 teenage nephews, my niece and nephew. We went on a hiking trip for 1 week, and they are 14 and 16 years old. And there was one moment that really puzzled me with my 14-year-old nephew. that I want to talk to you about. And then at the end of, or understanding teenagers section, I'm going to show you my kind of ideas of how to understand that behavior better based on brain development and developmental tests. So it's kind of like a puzzle or like a riddle that I'm going to talk to you about now, and then we're going to solve it at the end of the section. So my 14-year-old teenage nephew is a really cute boy, actually, a really nice guy. He's very smart, can solve really complex math problems, is like a basketball player. And so also background knowledge, I have a 15-month-old daughter. And this was the first time that he met his cousin, and then this, boy that I always, had a connection with, who's like really nice, sees my teenage daughter and makes like a really awkward squeak and then says, "I'm afraid of babies," and runs away. And I'm like, what? Because I was like, he's gonna be excited about, my daughter. And so I was really puzzled and quite frankly, a little bit offended by this reaction. In my opinion, everyone who sees my baby daughter is supposed to fall in love with her immediately. Yeah, so I didn't get it, but I'm gonna show you my thoughts about this behavior later with a little bit more knowledge about brain development and developmental tasks in teenage. All right, so let's jump into it. So if we look at a teenager's brain, obviously we have all the same, brain areas and structures that we have in an adult brain or in a child brain. But there are, every brain area develops at a different pace, okay? And when we look at teenagers, there are two areas that are specifically relevant, and that's the prefrontal cortex. This area is underdeveloped in teenagers, and the limbic system, that area is oversensitive in teenagers. And the meaning or the consequences of that is what we're going to talk about now. So the prefrontal cortex is this area of your brain, like this, right under your forehead. And the cortex in general, the outer shell of your brain is, responsible for a lot of higher brain functions. And the prefrontal cortex is responsible for high-level cognitive functions. It's actually something that we find only in mammals. So a turtle or an octopus, for example, really complex beings will not have a prefrontal cortex, and it's much bigger in humans than in any other mammal. So it's really something that sets us humans apart. And those high-level cognitive functions that I talked about includes things like planning ahead, planning what you're going to do tomorrow or next week or next year. Also predicting behaviors, predicting the consequences of the behavior that you show now and what it's going to do to you tomorrow, what consequences it's going to have in a week or in a year, which is something that a lot of teenagers struggle with. Decision making, inhibiting unwanted or inappropriate behavior. So that means stopping yourself from saying something really rude or doing something that later on you will find embarrassing or awkward. It's also responsible for understanding other people, self-awareness, and focusing one's attention. Okay, so you have to remember all of those things. All of those things are very difficult to do for a teenager, not because they're lazy or whatever we sometimes call them, because their prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped. The prefrontal cortex, for a long time, that's why I said we have learned so many new things in the last 1 or 2 decades. For a long time, we didn't know, but the prefrontal cortex keeps on developing well into our mid to late 20s. Okay, so there are parts of our brains that are not fully developed until early to mid adult age, right? And specifically in teenagers, this part is really underdeveloped. At the same time, we have the limbic system. So the limbic system is deeper inside the brain, whereas the prefrontal cortex is in the outer parts of the brain. Those deeper areas of the brain are usually responsible for more instinctive behavior, not really the cognitive part of the brain. So the limbic system is responsible for emotion and reward processing. So it's responsible for controlling basic drives, such, for example, a fear or fight or flight response, creating pleasure, going out into the world. Most animals have this kind of this part of their brain or something that's similar. It's responsible to lead to behaviors that secure survival, for example, running away from danger, but also it's making us, seek reward. And in the really most basic evolutionary sense, that means going out of your cave and seeking food and seeking ways to reproduce. And so this area in the brain that's, again, responsible for emotions and rewards has been found to be hypersensitive in comparison to adults when we look at teenagers. So what does that mean? Basically, we have mismatch. The mismatch in timing between two brain areas, because the cortex, the prefrontal cortex, is supposed to interact with the limbic system. It's supposed to control those instinctual parts of our brain, but it can't yet because it's not developed enough. So young teens are emotionally propelled by the limbic system, yet the prefrontal cortex is not as good at controlling this as it will later be. So basically, for a whole decade, at least between the ages of, let's say, 13 to 23, 24, 25, there's a decade of imbalances between emotional and contemplative thinking. I don't know, when I heard that first, I thought that was pretty crazy, the idea. And obviously, I asked myself, why? Why would that be? Because I do believe that a lot of those internal wirings of us as humans, but also of animals, have a reason, because this is something developed over thousands of years through evolution and selection and survival of the fittest and all of this. So why? Why would that be? Why would that make sense? And it can make sense if you think about what the teenage years are really there for. Okay, what are the developmental tasks of a teenager? What do they have to do except for go to school? And if you break it down, there are three really important developmental tasks that a teenager has to master. So first of all, they have to gain independence. Humans are born with a minimum amount of independence. A baby basically has zero independence. They cannot survive even a few hours without their parents' help, or maybe a few hours. I don't know how long really, but not really long. And then throughout our lives, we gain more and more independence. We will go to the slide alone on the playground, but only if we see that our parents are still there. And during the teenage years, we do a leap in seeking independence, which is very scary for parents also. So the teen may refuse to go with, the family to movies. They may want to demonstrate that they have their own will by refusing chores, questioning the parents, having their own head. They want to have more privacy. They do more stuff alone. And that, again, that's challenging, frustrating, scary. Maybe sometimes even, makes a parent proud. But you have to remember that at the same time, it's also very scary for a teenager to do so many new things on their own that they've never done before. And that's why we need this oversensitive limbic system, because the reward of going out in the world or proving something to your friends, doing stuff alone, has to be high enough for a teenager to go and do that. At the same time, if their prefrontal cortex was developed like ours as adults, they might be paralyzed by understanding the consequences of some of those behaviors, too afraid to make mistakes. They might be much more inhibited, as we are as adults at some point. And so this mismatch makes a lot of sense if we think about that fact that teenagers have to do a lot of things they've never done before, gain independence, take risks, go out there, and that's important because eventually, the teenage years are a preparation for leaving the house, leaving the nest. So it's necessary that they do those steps. Although it sometimes leads to really, weird things and making mistakes and falling on their head and sometimes even risky behavior that we have to intervene with, right? Specifically in groups. But essentially, it's important. The second developmental tasks that I want to refer to is building peer relations. So again, if you want to leave the nest, you have to be able to create a community and intimate relationships with people who are not your family. And that's something that teenagers learn. It's really a skill. It's a skill that they have to learn. And here, the prefrontal cortex is doing a lot of development because some social functions, for example, taking the perspective of another person is a responsibility of the prefrontal cortex. So teenagers are not yet as good at it, even the ones who are very sensitive. So they are learning, and as in every new skill, forming groups and being part of a group can be exaggerated, specifically in the early teenage years. So they're learning this new skill of like, we're a group and we belong together. And then they exaggerate in terms of, for example, the group rules. Everyone has to wear a certain outfit or be into some kind of music or have some kind of idea. And if you contradict, if you think differently, you might not, want to voice it because you might be excluded from the group, or it might be, embarrassing or shameful. So it's like this exaggerated, we belong together, you belong to us, and you don't. That sometimes explains, really weird group behaviors in teenagers. And you need this oversensitive limbic system where, group behaviors that might be risky, but that might, make you belong to a group and prove yourself to a group are rewarding enough for a teenager to do them so they can be part of the group. And learn this important skill. And there's a certain age, where as a parent, if you tell your teenager, you can be your individual self, it doesn't matter what others think of you, really lands nowhere in their brain. There's no area for it. Like that makes no sense to them because all they have to do evolutionarily is be part of a group and be liked by others and be normal in that sense. And later on, they can learn, oh, I can be friends with someone and still have a different opinion or be different from them. There's a certain age where that just doesn't make sense to a teenager. The third developmental task that teenagers have to master is building their own identity, which is, I do agree, related to independence. So in the teenage years, we see the emergence of, the teenagers developing their own personal values and morals. Children oftentimes just kind of take on the morals and ideas of their parents, but then in the teenage years, the adolescent goes out into the world, meets other people, experiences other environments. I don't know if you can relate to this, but a lot of my patients can relate to this moment when you kind of sit at a dinner table at a friend's house and you're like, whoa, this is different. I always thought that every dinner table was the same as in my house, but now I realize, oh, there's different ways to do things and they talk about different topics or their, interaction is very different. And then you're like, oh, okay, so like now I know what's going on at home and I know what's going on in other places and I get to choose, what's right for me and what I want to do. And again, we need this, going out into the world and being curious and taking risks for your child to kind of get to know different ideas and experiences. Yeah, that in a nutshell is kind of like the basic knowledge that I wanted to bring across in terms of teenagers. And I now want to use this knowledge to solve the puzzle of my 14-year-old nephew, who is very smart and actually very high achieving when it comes to math problems or basketball, but also afraid of a 15-month-old baby. So the first thing you have to remember is that my nephew does not have a template for what it means to meet a baby for the first time. His prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped, so his social skills are not the same social skills of an adult. So he doesn't know how to react when you see a baby for the first time. And that is scary. That scary feeling is felt more intensely by him because his limbic system is oversensitive. And then he panics inside and thinks like, oh my God, what do I do? What do I do? They have no, he has no template for it. And then he shows this like weird reaction of like saying, I'm scared of the baby, which obviously is not true. What he's really scared from is the fact that he doesn't know how to behave around a baby. And so his like instinctive oversensitive limbic system initiates a flight a flight response basically, and he kind of like, avoids the baby while nervously giggling, which makes no sense, but actually does make sense. Also, he's not very good at perspective taking yet. Again, that's part of the prefrontal cortex. So he doesn't know yet, that it's important to me that he will like my baby. He doesn't know because he cannot look into my head, and his ability to understand what's going on inside me emotionally is just not as developed yet. So he doesn't know how to act that part. And also his prefrontal cortex is not developed in terms of long-term thinking. So he can't think ahead and think, oh, well, that baby's going to be part of my family for a really long time now. I might want to have a relationship with her. He doesn't understand that in that moment. So he just shows his weird, reaction, goes into his room and chats with his friends. And that might, be offensive or, frustrating for me. But when I really think about it, and if I really think about, what teenage years are there for, and what he's supposed to do at that age, it makes a lot of sense. And also, I just reminded myself, like, he's 14 years old. He's not supposed to be into babies. I, on the other hand, my developmental task of a new mom is to be like super into babies. Like, I am evolutionarily programmed to be in love with babies right now. So there's quite a huge gap there, not only from his side, but also from mine. So, in a way, we can see the teenage years, as a great opportunity. Actually, there's huge leaps of development going on. The brain is very, very adaptable. It can learn so many different things. It's a fantastic opportunity for development and creativity, novelty seeking, risk taking, and a shift towards interacting with peers. All of those things that I explained to you are deeply rooted in biology and actually found not only in teenagers, but in all social mammals. So we really want to encourage teens to go after those developmental goals, seek outside relationships, develop their own independence, even if that's sometimes scary, and even if we know that they're going to, slip up on the way and make mistakes and get in trouble. But that's what they're meant to do. Even like in the most basic way, evolutionarily, those behaviors are meant to, help teenagers leave the nest, distance themselves from their family, find their own family in order to avoid inbreeding and create a healthier genetic population. So it's really like in their genes, some of those things. And just not something that's based on research, just some thought that came up for me while I was preparing this webinar is maybe it's even, maybe nature or biology even planned or intended those feelings of frustration that sometimes we as adults have with teenagers. Maybe that's also designed to help us to, manage this increasing, separation, the fact that they're going to go out into their world, manage our own, sadness over the fact that we have to let go. Maybe the frustration helps a little bit. Just a thought. okay, so we have all this knowledge and I want to reframe the teenage years, not reframe, but like look at them as a huge opportunity. So how can we do that? And how like can we connect, this knowledge to actual strategies in order to deal with teenagers? So let's talk about the limbic system. So it's hypersensitive. The teenage years can feel like a storm and bring with it really intense emotions. And that's dangerous because hair pulling is basically, in many ways, an emotion regulation strategy. And if in the teenage years we let the hair pulling become the default emotion regulation strategy, then we're at a problem. So we have to help teenagers to find different ways to deal with their emotions and calm this inner storm. And as parents, you're the anchor for your teenager. Sometimes I see it in my head, just like you're the mothership or the fathership, like in this picture. And your teenager is this small little paper ship, and they're leaving the nest. They're not in on board anymore. They're out there, but they're still connected to you through this line, right? And this connection is super, super important. So one really important aspect in the teenage years is to stay connected, to take care of this line, right? To make offers for connection, which is sometimes very frustrating because your teenager, as part of them seeking independence, is gonna refuse some of those offers for connection. Remember, this is part of their development. It shouldn't make you stop offering, making those offers, inviting them to things, trying to make time to be together with them. Another way to stay connected is to be curious, to ask your teenager questions, to show interest in what's going on with them. If you're a teenager, sometimes that happens more with teenage boys. If they're not, that much into talking, then stay curious about their hobbies, play their computer games with them, go show interest in the sports that they're interested in. That's very stereotypic. Whatever they're interested in, show interest, do it together with them, and then maybe, an opportunity for a conversation might open up. But with anchored, I also mean be authentic, don't kind of pretend you're their best friend. You're still their parent. Be authentic. If you don't get something, if something makes no sense to you, tell them, wow, like what was that word? I don't know that slang. Or well, you just told me, like, I understand only 50%, but it's so important to me that I want to understand you 100%. Can you explain it to me again? Another important way to make your teenagers stay anchored and connected in those very, topsy-turvy times is your own stability, which obviously requires work also from your side and self-care and the support system. So if you stay stable in terms of your values, in terms of your opinions, in terms of your emotions, you can stay calm and stable next to the storm. That has a very calming effect for your teenager who is sometimes probably very overwhelmed by what's going on for them. And a really good way to regulate intense emotions. I know that when we talk about emotion regulation skills, oftentimes what comes to mind is deep breathing or punching a pillow or whatever. But those are like little fixes. That's not really what emotion regulation means. Okay. One of the most effective and important emotion regulation strategies, in my opinion, is validation. Validation. Validation means to show interest in the emotion your child is experiencing, and then demonstrating to them or making them feel that their emotions make sense. There are a few things that are more calming and help process emotions more than someone else going there and saying, I see what you're feeling. It's normal what you're feeling, and it makes sense what you're feeling. And then you can still do deep breathing or whatever it is, but that's just something to like make the emotion go away, pass faster. But really, to process an emotion is also to give it space and to accept it. And that's why you can help your child learn to do through this technique of validation that I wanna show you some strategies of how you can do it. And also it's very important because teenagers also sometimes realize that, what they're feeling makes no sense to the outside world and it seems like exaggerated or others don't understand it. So being there and kind of signaling to your teenager, like, if I make an effort, I can understand why you feel the way you feel, is so relieving sometimes and will help them to not go into a spiral of also feeling ashamed of what they're feeling, right? So if you want to validate, if you want to meet your child's emotional experience with a validating from a validating perspective, there are several things you can do. Let's say your teenager comes back from home and says, "Oh, school sucks. Why do I even have to go there?" Now that is something that maybe a lot of you might, intuitively want to react to with like, why do you have to complain about school all the time? Is there nothing good going on there? Or something like, try to go to work. That sucks even more. You have it good. You're only going to school. You have to go to school. It's so important to learn about the world. Oh yeah, I know it sucked, but just think about, the date you have with your friends later tonight. That will, cheer you up. Or yeah, of course, school sucked. You went to bed yesterday at 2 a.m. You were probably very tired. So those things might all be true, but that's not validating to hear. So some first steps might, when your child says that and your first intuition is to say one of the things that I just mentioned, is to stop and first of all just ask a question. You can basically just repeat the sentence and add a question mark. Oh, you're asking yourself why you have to go to school. You don't like school right now. And then it's very important. The nonverbal cues are very important. If you want to talk to them, put your phone away and show them that they have your attention by stopping what you're doing, looking at them, making eye contact, nodding, saying mm-hmm, but most importantly, put your phone away. And once you have some understanding what's going on by asking questions and by paying attention to what your child is telling you, you can start with the first step of validation, which is showing them you are not alone. Okay, what you feel makes sense because I would feel the same way. I can understand. I also often didn't want to go to school when I was your age. Or what you are not alone with what you're feeling because other people might feel the same way as you. I get it. I hear many of the other parents talking about their kids having a hard time going to school as well. And the second way to validate would be not to say, okay, you're not alone. I would feel the same way. Other people are feeling the same way, but by making sense. Why does this emotion make sense? Okay, based on the situation. Wow, it must be so hard going to school when you feel like you have no friends in your class. You must feel lonely sometimes. And that's a difficult, thing to say for a parent because you don't want your child to be lonely, to just say that out loud because it might be true is not easy. You might want to immediately jump in and offer solutions, but that's not validation. If this is your child's reality, you as a parent just being there and acknowledging that this is what's going on is very powerful. Or It's super hard to do something when you feel like it doesn't interest you at all. When I have to go to work, I know I have a lot of boring meetings in a row. I sometimes have to work hard on motivating myself too. So that's basically both of them. You're not alone. I would feel the same. And also it makes sense, when you have to do boring stuff you're not interested in and someone's forcing you to do that, then that sucks. So you're not telling your child you don't have to go to school anymore. You're just signaling them, wow, I get it. And a third step, if you get there, can be, to offer support. I see that you have a hard time going to school because you're afraid someone will see your bald spot. Okay, like it makes sense the way you feel. How can I be here for you? Do you need me to just vent a little more to distract you, or do you want to think together about things or ways that we could make it easier for you? Yeah. So a little bit more complicated than breathing, but very, very effective. Also, this way you model, yourself, you model to your child, what it means to regulate an emotion. I'm going to get into this more right now about the modeling. It's very important. Um, if we think about the second very relevant brain area for the teenage years, the prefrontal cortex that we talked about in depth, right? So we talked about how it's underdeveloped. But if you think about it from a different way, it means it's under construction. It is developing. It is developing every day. There's really important things going on in the prefrontal cortex during the teenage years. So you are right there and you can help, your teenager to build their prefrontal cortex. You can influence how this brain area will develop and how well developed it's going to be, right? So, and sometimes in psychology, we also call this ability of a person, this inner voice that is able to decode social situations, plan for the long term, regulate emotions and rewards, to find solutions for problems. We call that the healthy adult. Okay. It's one of the many voices we have in our heads. We have the healthy adult, the part of ourselves that knows what's good for us and that should be, in control most of the time. But we also have demanding and critical voices in our heads. Okay. And sometimes we wonder where those voices come from. And I can tell you they come from our childhood mostly. The critical and demanding voices as well as the healthy adults. And a lot of the messages, a lot of the things that later on your teenager or your young adult child will tell themselves in their heads are messages that they picked up from you. Okay. So you become the voice inside your teenager's head. Not only when you talk to them, but also when you talk to yourself in front of them, the way you behave, the behavior that you model to them. If you talk to yourself in a way of like, wow, I'm such an idiot, or you look at yourself and you look at your body and like, I'm so fat, I have to go on a diet. Your child will internalize that. So if you tell yourself, why can't you stop pulling? Stop it already. That will turn into a demanding voice, into a punitive voice, into a critical voice. So that's a huge responsibility that you have there, but it's also a huge opportunity. You become your child's you are a big part of what later on is going to be your child's inner voice. And so in any situation where you're like, wow, I don't know what to do now. What do I do now? Like, what is the best way to react right now? Think about the situation your teenager is in. Think about the problem that they're having and the solution that you would want for them. And think about what they have to tell themselves in their head to get there. And that's what you have to tell them or model them, model to them. Um, so that's very important. Um, now a little bit, I want to go over to some tips and tricks that are maybe a little bit more concrete and specifically aimed at hair pulling. Okay, so a few things that are really important if your teenager is pulling their hair. The first step is you have to be knowledgeable about hair pulling. Um, the fact that you're here in this webinar shows that you already are interested, that you're part of our mailing list, that you maybe attended another webinar. By the way, I also did a webinar on support recently where I also talked about how you can talk to your child about hair pulling. So and that might also be useful. And I mentioned some strategies that I didn't mention here. But yeah, first of all, you have to be knowledgeable about hair pulling because your teenager is going to have questions. You know, what is hair pulling disorder? Why can I not stop? Am I weird for doing that? And if you don't know enough, you will not be able to answer those questions sufficiently. You will not be able to explain to them that this is a known condition, that a lot of other people have it, you know. For example, hey, you know how in your year you have 100 kids. Did you know that from science we found that 60 of them, about 60 of them have pulled their hair, picked their skin, or bit their nails, just like you? And did you know that based on science, we know that out of those 100 kids, probably about 4 have the same problem as you? You couldn't know because people don't talk about it, but we know from science, right? To give them those explanations that they need, you have to know first. Another very important thing is that if you see your child pulling their hair, your instinctive or first automatic reaction is to want to make them stop. But that's not a good idea, okay? Don't immediately intervene. You cannot get rid of the pulling by making your child feel bad about it. You don't want to be that demanding critical voice in their heads. You don't want to tell them to stop, force them to seek professional help, shame, scold, or embarrass them for the pulling. What you do want to do is, first of all, observe. Okay, when you notice the pulling, you can do the first step and understand your child's pulling behaviors. You can try to figure out when they are pulling, which time of day. Are they using any objects? What kind of movements are they doing? Where are they pulling? What triggers are there? Is it homework? Is it sitting for a long time? Is it being with their phone? Is it when they're really emotional or stressed? Um, are they pulling in front of other people or aren't they? All of those things you can find out first by just observing them. And once you have some idea of what's going on, then you can gently try to share that knowledge with your teenager, but not by giving a presentation on it, but can try it in a more gentle way. You can open with, I've noticed something recently. Do you want to hear about it? Inviting them, giving them the option to also refuse, and giving them the option to contradict. I'm wondering if I got that right. Can you please correct me if I'm wrong? What do you think? And then you can ask them to join and think about like, maybe we can, do this together. Maybe we can understand it together and, start being a team when it comes to understanding their patterns. And once you understand the patterns, then the next step is to intervene. Here I want you to remember that teenagers are not good at long-term planning. So anticipating, knowing the pulling patterns is so important because then you can anticipate when there's a trigger situation coming up. For example, if your child has to do a huge work for school today, where they're going to sit at their desk for hours, they're going to be bored or frustrated, and that's going to make them want to pull, then you can have fidgets around. You can help them set timers to take regular breaks. You can remind them to put on their gloves or whatever it is that helps them. Or you can encourage them to, switch up the place to like work on their desk for 30 minutes, then work at the kitchen table for 30 minutes, then on the floor for 30 minutes, whatever helps them. But this kind of long-term thinking of like, I'm going to do homework now, I might pull when that happens, might be difficult for your teenagers. So you can assist them by preparing, by putting, fidget toys all over the apartment or house, wherever you live, in places where they tend to pull. To just, help them with that, because their prefrontal cortex is just not developed yet enough to do that on their own, maybe. Another thing that is difficult with teenagers, because thinking about long-term consequences is not as easy for them, is to understand why sometimes we need therapy. Okay, you have to remember that most teenagers think short-term, and in the short term, going to therapy sucks. You have to open up. It's scary. It takes up time. They might be aware of the fact that it's costly. So if you think only about short-term consequences, it makes a lot of sense that not all teenagers want to seek out therapy, but you cannot treat hair pulling disorder on your own. You need therapeutic assistance. And obviously, getting parental guidance is very helpful. We do have a Trick Stop program for parents who want to learn how to deal with hair pulling disorder for their children or teenagers. So that's an option. But it can also be very helpful to help motivate your teenager to seek out professional help themselves. And one strategy that's really helpful is the one that I have on this slide. So what you want to do is, if you have the right communication and enough trust, is to sit down and say, I accept that you don't want to go to therapy right now, but I just want the both of us to think about all the consequences of saying yes or no before. I just want to have, I just want to look at it once, and then afterwards, if you still say no, that's totally fine. But let's just think about it a little bit. And then you can write that down, trying therapy versus not trying therapy, short-term, long-term, and start thinking about it together. It's really authentic and helpful if you also add your own ideas of why not trying therapy might have benefits, because that makes your teenager feel seen and their concerns be heard. And then obviously, what might be surprising for your teenager is the long-term consequences that are negative for not trying therapy and positive for trying therapy. That might surprise them, and that might add an additional perspective to their decision making. So that's something that I actually do quite a lot with my patients, my teenage patients in my private practice. Might seem simple to you as adults, but for teenagers, it's not as self-explanatory as we think. All right, that was it for today. So let's conclude. Teenagers' brains are marked by a mismatch in the development or in the timing of the development between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. This mismatch leads to behaviors or emotional experiences of teenagers that we sometimes find puzzling as adults. Those can also include risk behaviors and emotional outbursts where they still really need our assistance and our help. However, this mismatch also helps them tackle developmental tasks such as being part of a group, gaining independence, going out into the world, taking risks, and building their own identity. They still need you. They're still at home. They're still not adults. You are their anchor, their safe place, where they can go back to and where someone listens and understands them and makes sense of all the things that are going on. And you can help them do that by observing, sharing, preparing, and thinking about long-term consequences together. Before we go into the Q&A, I just want to remind you that obviously, we have monthly webinars because you're participating in one. But we also have online forums and blogs on our website, trickstop.com. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you want to try out TrickStop either as a person who seeks therapy for themselves or as a parent of a teenager or a child that is pulling their hair, then we have a promo code here that will give you a $100 discount on the first 4 weeks subscription. Oopsie. Okay. That's it for today. You can now write down questions in the Q&A section, and I'm going to get to as many as I can. Wow, I went a little bit over time with my presentation. But let's see if any questions come up. Please, if you have a question, don't raise your hand. Write it down. And if my answer isn't helpful, then you can even write down another comment, or if I didn't understand the question right. Okay, we have some questions here. The first one, does it make sense for me to sign up to TrickStop even though she is still under the impression that it's not that bad? It's 30 plus hours a month where she locks herself in the bathroom to measure her hair and trim the odd bits. How do I get her bought into signing up to TrickStop? Well, that first of all, that depends on your child's age. If she's younger than 13 years, I would not recommend for her to sign up at all, because this kind of online therapy program does require a certain amount of maturity and commitment. So then I would really recommend you to sign up, and kind of assisting your teenager, even if they are not aware enough of the problem, is also something, because TrickStop is not only an online therapy program. You're going to have a specialized expert therapist at your side that you can communicate with daily, so that you can talk to them about what's going on with your daughter. It sounds like, wait, you said she, right? Your daughter. What might be the reason behind her not wanting to acknowledge that this is a problem, because it's very individual. Like there's not one, amazing trick of how to make your daughter open for therapy. And sometimes it doesn't work, but you can still help even if, she doesn't want to join. So in any case, it would, in my opinion, it would make sense for you to sign up as a parent. You can use the promo code, try it out for 1 month. If it's not good for you, if you don't feel comfortable with your therapist, you can cancel. But yeah, that's what I would do first, to be able to help and assist her now, because through this guidance that you're going to get through your therapist, you might be able to convince her to seek out therapy, but you also might not. Sometimes it takes some time. Sometimes I see people who've been picking since they're young, and then they seek out therapy when they're 20, 25, they come into my private practice. And I know that might, scare you, that idea right now, but sometimes that's how it goes. And then it's best, it's still better if you, do the program and are able to help your daughter while she's not open to therapy yet. And best case scenario, with your therapist's help, you might be able to convince her to participate. What is the average time of consultant that will start seeing? So what's the average time after starting the program? That's how I understand this question, until we see positive results. So obviously it's different for every person, but based on our we actually published a peer-reviewed paper on our program, TrickStop and SkinPick, and there we saw that on average, clients who finished the program eventually felt, an improvement after 3 to 4 weeks. Have I had patients stop hair pulling? Yes, of course. Actually, we do plan also doing a webinar on talking about what therapy success looks like, because it's not always a complete stop of the pulling, but that definitely also happens. Yes. Thank you. That was very helpful. Well, thank you so much for telling me. I really take those webinars seriously, and I really try to do my best, because yeah, you guys are taking, an hour of your day, and I really want you to take something away from it. So Thank you for the feedback. She's 20 years old. Oh, okay. So that's an addition to the first question. Well, if she's 20 years old and still living at home, then you can do the program and assist her. If she's 20 years old and not living at home, then I think at that age, you pressing her to go to therapy will not help. I think then I would try to get to some place where she feels comfortable enough to talk to you about the pulling, because if she locks herself in her room for 30 hours plus, then that's a sign that she's kind of not trying, she kind of doesn't want to admit that there is a problem. And that there's maybe some element of shame. And then that means, first of all, to give her the impression that you are understanding, that you are non-judgmental. Then you first of all need to find some kind of communication. And once she opens up and talks to you about it, like I would try to be very gentle. And first of all, build communication around the topic, but not push her. That might even be damaging to her motivation to seek therapy. Okay. My 14-year-old daughter has been struggling with pulling her eyelashes. She has been able to stop for 14 days now, the longest since she started pulling. Well, that's amazing. She has been seeing a therapist every 2 weeks. Do you think rewarding her for that milestone could be an effective way to keep her from pulling? Ooh, that's such a good question. I don't think I would reward her. I would maybe, though, it's really important, like that you notice that milestone and help her notice her progress and be proud of her progress. So I would, yeah, I would maybe like not reward her, but I would like maybe ask her if there is like some way where she could reward herself, or where you can celebrate this together. Because you, again, like that's something, that's a skill that you want to model to her also later on in life when she's dealing with challenges, and let's say she's moved out of the house, to remember, well, I just dealt with, that was so challenging. Like I had such a hard time and I dealt with it and I coped with it. How can I reward myself now? What are the things that make me happy? So it's not something where you want to surprise her and do something for her. It's something that you want to do together with her, or encourage her to do for herself. But definitely, I like the idea very much. Um, She's been added. So again, with a 20-year-old who's not open for therapy, she's been added for about 7 years, and it gets worse since the pandemic, which makes a lot of sense. And I do understand the frustration. And sometimes it's like you like see it from the outside, and you see that she might profit from therapy and it might be helpful, but everyone has their own path. And for some people who pull their hair, there's like really a lot of shame around it, and that sometimes also stops us from seeking help, and that's okay. And she still might come around to it, and when she's a little older might be open to doing it, and it's never too late. But for now, you can work on making her feel comfortable talking about it with you, and that already is therapeutic, and that's already a lot. Okay, I'm going to try to ask two more questions because we're already at the end of our time. My daughter is 11 years old. She had this hair pulling habit a few years back. It is better now. She didn't pull her hair as much now. Should I still wait and see how things is going till she is 13 years old? Better now. She didn't pull her hair as much. So it was worse. It's now better. Um, and you're asking whether you should wait until she's 13 years old to join the program or seek therapy. That's how I understand it. Um, I mean, if it got better by itself, then I would try to talk to her and see whether she has awareness of what's going on. Try to understand why it got better, what helped her. And then if you see like there are certain things that help her or certain ways where she, for example, learned to regulate emotions otherwise, then I would support her in that, in kind of expanding those new skills. And yeah, I think I would wait for now. I would and work with her together on, just like I explained it in one of the slides, like kind of observe what's going on, see the things that still trigger her, try to build like awareness for what's going on together with her without pointing your finger, just, observing it in a curious way, not by judging or saying, wow, you pulled another hair, like I can't believe it. And stay on it. And it might continue to get better. At the same time, you can create self-awareness, because I'm just guessing that if it got better now, her own motivation to seek out therapy right now might be very limited. If she is motivated to seek therapy, although it got better, then I think that's always a good idea. But otherwise, yeah, I would observe and wait and build communication around the topic and awareness. What type of therapist would be beneficial for trick? So I would look for a therapist whose expertise comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, and I would check whether they have expertise when it comes to habit reversal training. So cognitive behavioral therapy is generally the therapeutic direction that you're looking for, but not every cognitive behavioral therapist has expertise when it comes to hair pulling. So there is one specific cognitive behavioral therapy approach that's specifically designed to help people who pull their hair, and that's called HRT, habit reversal training. So those are the key things that you're going to look for. A cognitive behavioral therapist that has knowledge and expertise in applying habit reversal training. That's also what we're doing at TrickStop. This would be the most important thing that I would look for, because otherwise the risk of you going to a therapist who actually doesn't 100% know how to treat hair pulling and just thinks it's like some kind of symptom of some underlying depression, the risk is too high that you're going to get that it's going to be ineffective. That's also one reason why we founded TrickStop, because in some areas it's really hard to find someone who will be able to treat hair pulling disorder the way it should be treated. And that's why, this online therapy program is helpful to some people. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the feedback. Last question. My son is 10 years old, is on the spectrum and has ADHD, and started pulling his eyelashes and eyebrows since April. The pulling was better during the summer when he was not going to school. Well, that makes sense. But again, as soon as the school started, it started. We tried giving fidgets and prizes, but none worked. How does your program work when the child is so young and not able to control his emotions? Well, with 10 years old, you are very young, but practicing emotion regulations skills is very important, and also possible at that age. Although obviously it's much more complex when you're on the spectrum and you have ADHD, this impulsivity that you get from ADHD. But like that means that it's harder to regulate your emotions, but it doesn't mean, but it makes it all the more important to work on healthy emotion regulation strategies. So fidgets and prizes are very important, but habit reversal training is actually more complex than that. It involves a high level of awareness for the pulling, and ability to monitor the pulling that you want to develop and then also teach your child. It develops stimulus control, which means to identify triggers and reduce triggers. And also the second strategy, response prevention, includes more than just fidgets. So there's really a lot more to learn, a lot more knowledge to gain that you as parents could gain in the program in order to support your child, or in parent counseling if you have like an experienced parent counselor, clinical psychologist that could help you. But there's definitely more than fidgets and prizes that you could do to support your son. Yeah, although it's like that's a lot to deal with as a parent, you know. Oftentimes, like the combination of being on the spectrum and ADHD is more common than we think, and it's you have to become expert parent to help your child to deal with all of the challenges that brings with it, and it's amazing that you're participating in this webinar and looking for solutions and trying to support your child. It's not easy at all, but like I mean this in an encouraging way. There's always more to learn, and there's more ways that you can assist your child when they started hair pulling than fidgets and prizes. Those are good ideas, but there's more, and you can try out or program or seek out parent counseling. But then I would definitely look for someone who has experience with hair pulling. All right. Well, thank you for those amazing questions, and thank you for participating. I'm not going to be able to answer any more questions because we're out of time. Wherever you are in the world, whether it's the morning or afternoon or evening for you, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining, and goodbye for now.